Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The wagon creaked with strain as it rolled over the uneven trail, the wheels groaning under years of wear, the mule's hooves slow and steady in the late afternoon heat. The light was dry and angled, stretching long shadows from every mesquite tree lining the road. Distant hills sat motionless in the haze, and a soft layer of dust hung in the air, kicked up in a loose trail behind the wagon. Silas Ward, age 38, sat at the reins. His face was lined from years of wind, sun, and silence. He wore a plain tan shirt, faded where the seams met, a brown coat that had weathered at least 3 winters, and boots he'd resoled himself with cut leather. His eyes, sharp and watchful, stayed on the trail, though nothing moved for miles. He wasn't a man who ever let his guard down, not even in open country. He'd come down from his homestead that morning to barter for feed and a few tins of coffee. The old trading post at Furnace Fork was drying up, half the shelves empty, the storekeep too drunk by noon to count coins right. Silas had left quietly, as always. He never stayed long in town, never spoke more than necessary. He had no family left and didn't look for company. The last time he had tried, it cost him more than he talks about. That was 5 years ago. Since then, survival had been the only plan. The woman came into view not long past the dried creek crossing. She walked beside the road barefoot, her steps slow, her back straight, even though she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was long, black, and uncombed, hanging loose over her shoulders, and her arms were tight against a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. Her dress, natural toned and plain, showed where the shoulders and frayed seams around the sleeves. One moccasin was nearly split at the side. She didn't look up when he approached. She didn't wave, just kept walking. Silas slowed the mule. He didn't speak at first, just watched her from the wagon bench. She finally stopped, standing a few feet away, eyes low, breathing uneven but controlled. "You headed far?" he asked, voice low. She nodded once. "North." He studied her hands. Rough but not shaking. No rings. No weapon. No bag other than the bundle. "You got food?" She didn't answer, but the way her grip tightened on the bundle told him enough. He pointed at the wagon bed. "You can ride. Don't talk if you don't want to." She climbed up without hesitation, not looking at him, not looking around. She sat on the far side of the seat, facing forward. There was no fear in her eyes. No trust, either. Just awareness. She moved like someone who had known danger and learned how to keep still until it passed. They rode for nearly an hour without a word. The trail narrowed at points, forcing the mule to slow. Neither of them shifted position. Silas felt his jaw tighten from time to time, but not from discomfort. It was the silence. He was used to being alone, but being alone next to someone, without knowing what they expected, was different. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm, flat. "My name's Anika. I'm Apache." He gave a slow nod. "Silas." Another stretch of quiet passed before she continued. "My husband's dead. 2 years now. Killed near Fort Burnett. I was living with my uncle's people, but they moved south. I stayed behind. Now I'm trying to reach kin near Rock Hollow." Silas didn't respond. He knew that stretch of land. Mostly open plains and thorn brush. Dangerous country alone. "You gave me water," she said next. "You're taking me across land. That means something." He glanced over. She wasn't looking at him. She stared ahead, hands resting on her bundle, steady. "What does it mean?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. "In my people's way," she said, "it means you've taken responsibility for me. You carried me. You fed me. You brought me under protection. That means marriage. Not someday. Now." He didn't flinch, just stared ahead at the wagon trail, jaw set, the reins slack in his fingers. "I don't expect anything you don't give freely," she added. "But I won't pretend it didn't happen." They were nearing the cabin now, just beyond a low ridge where the trees thinned out. His place wasn't much. Small barn, fenced pasture, one-room house with a slanted tin roof, and smoke chimney patched with clay. No one came out this way unless they had a reason. That's why he'd stayed. Silas slowed the mule and brought the wagon to a stop near the barn. He climbed down, boots thudding dry against the dirt, then moved to the back and unlatched a crate of feed. He said nothing. She stepped down herself. No complaint, no hesitation. She stood a moment, took in the barn, the corral, the line of the cabin against the coming dusk, then turned to him. "I'll sleep in the barn." He nodded. "There's a lantern hook inside. Bucket of water by the door." He didn't walk her there. He didn't tell her to stay or go. He just carried the sack of feed toward the corral, his back tight with tension he didn't understand yet. Inside the cabin, he lit the small oil lamp, stirred the beans in the pot, then spooned them into 2 plates. Set them down on the table. She entered without knocking. She didn't sit until he did. They ate in silence. When they finished, she rinsed the plates without being asked and stepped back outside. The barn door creaked, closed behind her. Silas stood alone in the center of the room. The lantern light flickered across the bare floor. He didn't feel in danger, didn't feel tricked, but something had changed. And not just outside. She had spoken clearly, hadn't begged, hadn't assumed. She had just stated what was. And now he had to decide what that meant. He checked the door lock, adjusted the window latch, and sat down by the stove, the scrape of the chair legs loud in the quiet. Out back, the mule stamped once. He stared at the wall for a long time before finally standing to blow out the lamp. Tomorrow would bring more than just chores. The sun broke late, pale and thin over the low ridge. It barely warmed the brittle frost clinging to fence posts and the barn roof. Silas Ward stood by the well, cranking the rope slow, the creak of the pulley cutting through the morning stillness. His breath hung in front of him, short and even. The mule chewed at dry feed in the paddock, swishing its tail at nothing. The barn door opened with a soft groan. Anika stepped out, the same bundle clutched tight under one arm. Her braid was neater than the night before. She wore the same travel-worn dress, but had cleaned it up at the seams using water from the trough. Her eyes met his briefly before drifting back to the ground. She didn't say good morning. Neither did he. She walked toward the small woodpile and crouched beside it, began sorting through what was usable. No hesitation, no permission asked. She gathered 4 solid logs, carried them to the porch, then disappeared into the cabin. Silas didn't follow. Instead, he carried the full bucket to the trough, poured it slow. Then another. His thoughts stayed quiet, but something in him kept checking the yard as if it no longer fully belonged to him. Inside the cabin, she had already lit the stove. The fire inside crackled low, but even, and the pot of leftover beans had been set atop the iron plate. Not for herself. She hadn't touched a spoon. She sat on the floor with a cloth in her lap, mending a split seam on the blanket he'd tossed her the night before. He watched her from the doorway, unsure if he should step in. She didn't look up. "I'll fix the fence line today," he said after a pause. Her needle paused mid-stitch. North corner sagged. Silas blinked once. That corner had been bowing for weeks. He hadn't spoken of it. She resumed sewing. Horse might push through if the wire gives. He stepped inside, moved to the table. She didn't shift position, didn't explain why she had walked the land before sunup. She just kept working. By midday, the sun stood high, and sweat had begun to gather along his collar as he worked the posts along the far edge. The soil was hard from drought, but he drove each stake deep with the same steady rhythm he used for everything else. The wire had frayed in places, twisted where a coyote might have tested it. He replaced 2 full lengths. Didn't rush. At some point, he noticed movement near the barn. She was hauling a wooden crate across the yard, dragging it toward the back of the cabin. A short while later, she reappeared with a broom fashioned from tied twigs. She began sweeping the porch. She didn't glance toward him, didn't wave. She just worked. He straightened from the fence, rolling his shoulder out. A part of him wanted to ask what she was doing. Another part already understood. By late afternoon, a plate had been set on the table again, this time with fresh cornbread, simple but done right. She had found the meal tin and the pan without him saying where they were. The stove was cleaned out, kindling split and stacked beside it. When he entered, his coat dusty and his back tight, she stood near the window, hands folded in front of her. The bundle still sat in the corner, untouched. "You got a message you're waiting to send?" he asked, nodding at the bundle. She shook her head. "No, It's nothing for travel anymore. He nodded once and sat. She joined him, silent again. They ate without words. The bread was dry at the edges, but warm. She poured water from the tin cup into his glass, then into her own. It wasn't servitude, just rhythm. After the meal, she stood and cleared the dishes. He stood too. You fixing to stay long? He asked plainly. Anika looked at him. Not soft, not hard, just still. I already stayed, she answered. That night, she did not go to the barn. Instead, she took the blanket, set it down just inside the cabin wall near the door, not near the stove. She unrolled it and sat. No questions asked, no challenge made. Silas stood across the room by the cupboard, unsure what to make of it. You said your people see it different, he finally said, about what a man owes. She didn't rise, didn't lower her eyes, just responded. It's not about owing. It's about knowing what's been done and not pretending it wasn't. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. Not sure I ever wanted anything permanent, he admitted. Her voice was even. You already chose that. When you stopped the wagon. No one spoke for a long stretch. The wind scraped faintly against the cabin walls. Finally, he nodded once and moved to the stove, banking the fire low for the night. He didn't tell her to leave. She didn't ask if she could stay. Boundaries weren't drawn that night. They were understood. Morning light crawled in slow, pale across the floorboards, touching the worn boots beside the door and the rough-grained table marked from years of use. Silas Ward was already outside, his shirt sleeves rolled, steam rising from the tin coffee cup in his hand. He stood near the corral fence, watching the mule nose around the trough. His coat hung from a fence post, dust clinging to the shoulders from the previous day. Inside, Anika swept the cabin floor with steady, even motions. She hadn't slept much, neither had he, but neither mentioned it. There had been no words when they'd woken, just the rustle of blankets being folded, the stove being stoked, and the sound of water being ladled from the bucket. They kept apart through routine. Silas checked the leather straps hanging from the saddle rail, rubbing down each with oil and checking the stitching. He didn't glance toward the window, but he knew she moved past it twice. She wasn't restless. She was watching patterns. He recognized that from his own habits. She stepped outside after a while, carrying the dented cooking pan and the 2 tin plates. She crossed the yard, found the wash basin behind the barn, and worked with practiced motion. Not a word was spoken, but she didn't look lost. He saddled the mule and stepped up into the stirrup, testing the cinch as he settled in. Ridge trail needs checking, he said flatly, adjusting the reins. Won't be gone long. She wiped her hands dry on her skirt, didn't nod, didn't frown, just turned and walked back toward the cabin, her posture unchanged. He rode west, past the low rise and into the hill slope where brush tangled between outcrops of stone. The wind there was colder, steady, and the sky had a gray edge to it. He checked the trail where it forked toward the creek, scanning for signs of animal tracks or fresh cuts in the dust. There had been rumors of bandits passing near Stone Hollow, but no real trouble yet. Still, he didn't trust quiet stretches. Each hoof step felt louder in the silence. Back at the cabin, Anika stacked wood near the porch, sorting the good cuts from the damp ones. She pulled a small hatchet from beside the barrel and split kindling, her movements focused, measured. She paused once to look out toward the direction Silas had gone, then returned to the task. When he returned past noon, sweat along his collar and a thin cut on his hand from a thorn branch, she was sitting on the porch step, threading leather cord through a torn boot strap. She didn't stand, didn't greet him, just kept working. He dismounted, tied the mule to the post, and stepped past her toward the pump. He filled the tin cup and drank slow. The cut stung. You get the fence checked? She asked, eyes still on the strap. Ridge is clear. Creek shallow. Wind carried smoke near the bluff, though. Could have been a campfire. She nodded faintly, then rose and headed inside. When he followed minutes later, a fresh rag was laid on the table beside a bowl of boiled water and a strip of clean cloth. He didn't ask. He sat down and cleaned the cut himself. Later, while he mended a broken fence latch, she returned from the hills behind the cabin with wild onions and a half-full pouch of fire herbs. She laid them on the table without speaking, then knelt to wash her hands at the bucket. Silas noticed her nails, clean with care. She didn't act like a guest. She didn't act like a wife either. She behaved like someone learning the weight of a place before claiming it. They ate separately that evening. He took his plate out to the porch, watching the sky dim. She stayed near the stove, eating slowly, eyes on the firebox. Afterward, he brought in the bucket, refilled the basin, and stood by the doorway. She stood too. "I can take the barn tonight," she said evenly. "No need," he replied. She didn't argue. She didn't thank him. She folded her blanket again and laid it out in the same place as before, by the door, near her bundle, within view of the entrance. He banked the fire without comment, pulled his coat from the peg, and sat beside the window for a long stretch, oiling the rifle he hadn't touched in weeks. They didn't speak again that night, but the way she placed the tin cup upside down after washing it, and the way he left the lamp burning half bright until her blanket was set, those were the markers. Chores divided them by task, but each decision brought them 1 inch closer. Not by choice, not by push, just by staying. The knock came just past midday. 3 firm raps against the cabin door. Measured, not frantic, not hesitant. Silas looked up from where he stood beside the stove, elbow deep in a crate of nails and broken hinges. The hammer in his hand stilled. He didn't move right away. Anika glanced at him from the table. She had been sorting dried herbs into small bundles, tying each with strips of reed thread. Her eyes didn't widen, but her posture shifted. Not fear, readiness. The knocks came again, louder this time. Silas placed the hammer down without a word, walked to the door, and pulled it open slow. A tall man stood outside, lean and dust-covered, face shadowed under a dark hat. His coat was travel-stained, collar pulled high, and one hand rested near the handle of a revolver tucked into a cracked holster. His eyes moved past Silas and landed briefly on the woman inside before returning to the doorway. "Didn't expect company this far out," the man said, tone flat but not aggressive. "You Silas Ward?" Silas didn't answer right away. His hand stayed on the doorframe. "Depends who's asking." "Travis Kane," the man replied. "Heard you might be needing help with freight come spring. I was told you've got land worth crossing." Silas stepped outside, closed the door behind him with a quiet pull, and crossed his arms. "Not hiring," he said plainly. Kane studied him a moment. "You've got stock. You got fencing. Figure you're not working all this alone." "Don't need a partner," Silas said. "Didn't say I wanted to be one." They stood that way for a few moments, silence settling heavy between them. Kane shifted his weight, letting his gaze drift toward the paddock where the mule grazed lazily. The sky had begun to cloud over, casting the yard in pale shade. "I saw signs near the old bluff," Kane added. "Someone's camping high. Could be riders from the Southern Trail. Just thought you'd want to know." Silas gave a brief nod. "Appreciate the warning." Kane turned halfway toward his horse, then paused. "You've got company," he said, not as a question. "She stays here," Silas answered. "No judgment," Kane said, mounting up. "But times like these, folks ask questions about who belongs where." Silas didn't respond. Kane clicked his tongue and rode off without another word, dust rising behind the hooves as he vanished down the trail he'd come from. Inside, Anika had returned to her work, though one of the bundles had been set aside, forgotten mid-tie. She looked up when Silas entered. He didn't sit. He poured water from a jug into the tin cup and drank it all before speaking. "Drifter. Wanted work." Anika watched him. "You sent him off. He wasn't here to work." She nodded once, resumed tying the bundle. "Someone's camping near the bluff," Silas said. "He might have been watching our trail." Anika placed the finished bundle aside and stood. She crossed to the back wall, pulled her bundle of belongings close, untied it for the first time